And we have the situation of Lord Christopher Monckton being back in Australia for a tour. We're often told that there is a consensus on global warming. Remember, they changed the name to climate change because global warming got a little bit hard to swallow. We all now are told that there is a consensus, that the science is finalised, everyone agrees. But of course, that's not the case, is it? The idea that carbon dioxide, an odourless, colourless gas that is necessary for life, a gas that you and I breathe in and breathe out 12 times or more a minute as an adult, and keep in mind that when we exhale, we actually exhale about 100 times the level of carbon dioxide that we inhale. So we're huge carbon dioxide emitters ourselves. All of this apparently affecting world temperature and destroying the planet, and we have to bring ourselves to check. Well, is that the case at all? And certainly, even if it is the case, and you believe that, how much difference will a tax make when the tax, as we're getting it from a carbon tax point of view, is not actually doing anything to stop people emitting? All it's doing is kind of fining them for doing it and then giving the money back to them in compensation. Not just you and me, well, I won't get much of it, but not just a lot of people, but also the emitters themselves, the people who are said to be creating the pollution, the manufacturers, the coal miners, the industry, mining in general. They're going to be compensated as well. How does that stop them doing anything? Ultimately, many of these people will simply pack up and move overseas and create their pollution and their emissions, if you look at it that way, in another country, still impacting the globe if that's in fact what's happening. And you and I won't have that part of our economy. We won't have those jobs. We won't have those Australians able to pay tax because they've got jobs. We won't have any of that. Lord Monckton is currently in Perth, and he's been good enough to join me this morning as he commences his Australian tour. Thanks for your time.
It's a real pleasure to be back with you, and what a joy to be here in Australia again.
It is a lovely place, isn't it? I hope you're enjoying Perth. It's the place of part of my family's sort of background. It's a wonderful part of Australia.
Well, it's a great part of the world. I had two huge meetings here when I was last here, and I think we're going to try and do the same again this time, playing to packed houses. It's a subject which fascinates people, the way that the governing class, the class politique, has kind of gone off in its own direction on this one. I mean, there was Julia Gillard this morning talking on the television about carbon pollution. First of all, it's not carbon, it's carbon dioxide.
Yes.
Secondly, as you've just said, it ain't pollution. This is the air we breathe out. And they've always said they were going to tax the air we breathe. Now they've found a way to do it. And it's completely pointless.
It is fun, isn't it? It's always been a standing joke. One day they'll get around to taxing the air we breathe. And now they've done it. Now they've done it. Look, we're often told, Lord Monckton, about consensus. The science is settled. It's a matter of fact. Humans are creating global warming. In fact, I mean, there'll be a lot of people who say, well, we're not sure, but is it fair to say the science isn't settled? There are many scientists eminent around the world in large numbers that simply aren't getting the voice that those who go along with the UN and governments are?
Well, that's quite right. You've got people of the eminence and standing of Ian Plimer here in Australia. You've got Bob Carter. You've got, in America, Dick Lindzen, who knows more about the atmosphere than anybody else alive. I just spent a week with him, sitting at his feet, listening and trying to learn from the guy who has this formidable knowledge of every little wrinkle or eddy in the atmosphere. And he says the idea that the climate could be built in such a way as to have so-called positive feedbacks, where a little warming started by us with carbon dioxide becomes a warming 3 or 4 times as big, which is the way they make it look as though we're going to have this problem. He said no benevolent creator would ever design a planet that behaved that way. And of course the feedbacks are either zero or, more likely, slightly negative, which means you don't have a problem. If you double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you'll get maybe 1 Celsius degree of warming. Is that harmful? No, it isn't.
Look, I suppose the big question, in fact, I'm sure the big question for a lot of people is, if none of this is true, if this indeed is just a big hoax, it's a fraud, they're just finding a way to, as we've said, tax the very air that we breathe, why? Who's benefiting?
First thing is, this is the biggest concentration of wealth and power in the hands of the few at the expense of the many that's ever happened in human history. This is a transfer of wealth and power from the poor to the rich. from the little guy to the big guy, from the weak guy to the strong guy. It's the way that democracy isn't supposed to work. It's a denial of democracy. What they're doing here is the governing class has got fed up with democracy. It doesn't want you and me, the voters, to decide what's what anymore. We can't be trusted. They know better. So they want to take the power from us, have it in their own hands. You've got bankers making a fortune out of carbon trading, or they hope to. You've got people who are making the windmills and other so-called green, so-called renewable technologies, all of which actually emit more carbon dioxide, if that's what floats your boat, than simply burning coal would do. You have the Greens who are profiting by it. You have communists everywhere who are profiting by this, socialists everywhere, because they've always believed in concentrating the wealth in the hands of the few, as long as they are the few, and we, the many, have to pay. And the idea of Julia Gillard saying, well, we're going to take the money from you with one hand and give it back with another, that tells you all you need to know. What they want is the power, and they want the wealth, and they're going to take it. This is the governing class worldwide saying two fingers to the voters, we're going to do away with democracy, concentrate power in the UN, other international bodies, not one of which is elected. Every time you transfer power from us, the voters in states like Australia, which still have democracy, to a supranational or increasingly a global body, such as the global control of global warming, which they're trying to set up, that's a transfer from elected hands to unelected hands. That means the power is passing away from us. Our pen, with that cross on the ballot paper, that used to rule. Not anymore. Not if these people get their way. They must be stopped.
They used to they seem, these powers, this government in particular, our government, doesn't seem to be concerned at all, though it's evident that such will happen, that our industries will ultimately, if it becomes too expensive to operate in Australia, move offshore to places where there are no carbon taxes and there are no issues of this kind particularly, and that which gave jobs to Australia and helped produce our own economy simply won't exist here. They seem not to be worried about that. Are we in a situation where the people we think are representing us are just simply not working for us?
This, I think, is true to a very large extent. I'm glad to hear that Tony Abbott has been standing up and saying over and over again, if you bring in a carbon tax, we will repeal it. And that, I spoke in the mining district of Newcastle last time I was here. It was the most moving experience. They'd booked originally a small room in the town hall, and that was full hours before I began to speak. By the time I turned up, they had already hired the entire town hall. That wasn't big enough, 1,000 people, so they opened the gallery above as well, another 400 people, and we still turned hundreds away. And here were people, these have always been for me the heroes of labour, the people who dig the darkness underground to bring men light. These are the people who are going to have their noses rubbed in it by the government, which many of them perhaps elected. They may have thought, many trade unionists perhaps did think, that Julia Gillard and the socialists were going to be the workers' champions. And here we have this extraordinary paradox of the workers' champions turning on the workers, spitting them in the face, kicking them in the painful parts, and grinding them down and saying, no, we're going to shut down the great industries, the heavy industries, the mining industries, the industries where the real heroes of labour have always worked. These are the people who are going to suffer, and suffer most, if Julia Gillard gets her way, because you're quite right, they will just go overseas, the companies who can't afford any longer to be in Australia because it's no longer a free country. It's a horror that what's being proposed here. It's a tragedy, and it's a tragedy above all else for the ordinary, hard-working people of Australia.
And indeed, we see a report this morning that whilst Julia Gillard wants to close down coal, while the Greens are talking about closing down coal, our own farms are being bought up by the Chinese government so they can explore and find coal. So it would seem that it's okay for the Chinese government to explore and find coal in Australia and make much of that, but not our own people in our own nation with our own coal.
And as you rightly said in the intro to this interview, you won't hear the Greens saying a single thing against their communist friends in communist China, who are still arresting and detaining people at will if they dare to speak out against the regime. No doubt it'll come to that here if we go on this way. And remember, Bob Brown, the Greens, where is their head office? It's in Hobart, Tasmania. What is Hobart? It is a seaport. Where is the office? Right on the seafront, directly inches away from the supposedly, allegedly, rapidly rising sea. If they believed a word of what they're saying, they'd have sold that office long ago and moved to higher ground. These people are completely dishonest. It's all about advancing the cause of, call it what you will, international socialism, international communism, the international left, the new world order, the new age. There are so many names for it. But what it means in the end is more power for a few of them and a lot less power and wealth and jobs and success for the rest of us.
Lord Monckton, why are so many in the scientific community? We're always hearing, of course, that the science is, it's consensus, it's settled, and we sort of dealt with that a moment ago to a degree. But why are so many in the scientific community prostituting themselves? Is it about grants? Is it about you get shunted to one side unless you go along with what government wants to hear?
There's a very large element of self-preservation among the scientists who have drifted along with this. You've got, around the world, I identified some time ago, and they were eventually confirmed when we got their names thanks to ClimateGate, about 24 scientists who are the genuinely, utterly corrupt, utterly politicized scientists who are deliberately producing the main bogus science behind all this, with bad scientific papers that their cronies in the editorial boards of the peer-reviewed journals will print without examining it properly. A tiny handful. Then you have what Lenin used to call the useful idiots. These are the people who go along with what has become fashionable among the academic left, because the left, the academia has been left now for about a century, well to the left politically of the rest of us. And this is because they are nearly all paid for by taxpayers. And they're not going to be grateful for that. They come to expect it as a right. So it's a matter of social convenience, political expediency, and above all, financial profit. These people are now making fortunes by pretending that the science is settled. And let's remember that this phrase about the science being settled, the debate being over, Bob Carter does a great lecture on this. He tracked it down to a communist pressure group called the International Public Policy Research Institute in the United Kingdom in 2006 in the summer. They came out with that line, they peddled it round their communist friends worldwide, and now every time you hear somebody telling you the science is settled, they are either a communist themselves or they're parroting what was originally devised as a communist propaganda line. We know the science can't be settled because the climate, as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change itself said in a rare moment of honesty in 2001 in its report, it said the climate is a complex, chaotic, non-linear, dynamic object, so that the long-term prediction of future climate states is not possible. So if they're trying to tell you that we can predict what the climate is going to behave like in 100 years' time, if we add a tiny bit of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, the IPCC itself says no, we can't. Says no, the science isn't and can never be settled.
Lord Monckton, I'm very grateful for your time. Welcome back to Australia. We look forward to seeing you in Sydney and in New South Wales generally, and a little bit later in the program I'll give a full rundown of where you'll be appearing during the course of this trip. Thank you again for your time this morning.
It's a real pleasure, and one very, very quick final point, if I may. Even if they were right about the science, it doesn't work economically because it's cheaper to do nothing, even if the worst consequences that they imagine were to happen. It's cheaper and more cost-effective to do nothing and adapt in a focused way to any consequences of any warming that may occur, as and when they occur, than it is to do any of the things that they propose. This is the most extraordinary thing. And if you talk about doing science by consensus, the consensus in the economic literature is exactly that. I can quote you paper after paper where they say the cost of doing nothing and letting it happen is going to be around 2% of GDP worldwide between now and 2100. The cost of mitigation, the cost of trying to prevent that by not emitting CO2 or regulating it or taxing it or trading it, is going to be 5, even 10 times greater. So there's no economic sense behind this, even if they were right on the science, which they're not.
A money-raising exercise for power to the very few and more money to the very few and nothing for the rest of us. Thank you again for your time.
Bless you.
All the best. Lord Christopher Monckton now on his tour of Australia.